Aggressively on their own continent before accidentally capturing overseas territories, now utterly dominant militarily, politically, and economically. What else do you need to know? Throw in the fact that if you believe the Soviet Union was Carthage and that the Cold War is our equivalent of the Punic Wars, then you can even locate us within the larger timeline right around the rise of the Gracchi brothers, and, hey look, tea parties. Except that one thing that's really been driven home to me lately is that while you can find these superficial similarities, there are much deeper differences. Every powerful nation follows its own trajectory for its own particular reasons towards its own particular ends, though usually at the height of each one's power they claim that they are the rebirth of the Roman Empire. For me, the biggest difference between America and Rome is that compared to Rome, the United States is a baby, and could very well prove to be merely a flash in the pan. The Roman Empire became the dominant state in the Mediterranean around 200 BC, and remained as such in one form or another until the fall of Constantinople in the 1450s. I mean, we are talking about a nearly 2,000-year period where you simply cannot talk about anything that occurred in North Africa, Europe, or the Middle East without talking about Rome. America, by contrast, was a pretty decent regional power for about a century, a pretty major world power for about 75 years after that, and has been living with the kind of unipolar prestige Rome enjoyed for centuries for about the last 20 years. If the United States of America is still around in 3010, I think maybe then we can start talking about comparisons to Rome. Until then, things happen, nations rise and fall, and borders shift. I'm not saying America can't dominate the world for a millennia, I'm just saying that it's an awful lot to ask of anyone. Rome was all about longevity and stability, and that is a test that no one in the West has been able to pass since. Alfonso was one of the first to raise the issue of Roman dealings abroad, and the first to mention the Far East, a particular topic that was seconded at least a half dozen times. So, to paraphrase all of those questions, what, if any, relationship existed between Rome and China? The majority of the contact between Rome and China was indirect, but the two great bookends of the world certainly knew that the other existed. The Han Dynasty, which persisted in one form or another from about 200 BC to 220 AD, was rising at the same time as the Romans, and as Rome headed east, the Han headed west, and it was during this period that the links became more overt. With the stabilizing hand of the Han in place, the famous Silk Road was able to knit itself together, carrying silk and other oriental treasures from China all the way to Antioch and from there to Rome, while, among other things, Roman glasswork made their way back to the Chinese. In 97 AD, a Chinese embassy was sent west to try to make contact with the Kingdom of the Da Qin, which is what the Han called Rome, but apparently they were stopped short in Mesopotamia after the Parthians explained that the difficult crossing to Rome would take another 2 years at least. This bald-faced lie was meant to keep the two poles of the lucrative trade routes, which Parthia controlled, from ever meeting and working out a way to bypass the Parthian middlemen. In 166, though, a Roman embassy was sent east and was able to make contact with the Chinese emperor. Debate still swirls about how the Romans got there, whether by sea or overland, but a meeting definitely occurred, and the Romans offered up all kinds of gifts from the West, including a book of Greco-Roman astronomy. Nothing concrete seems to have followed the meeting, though, and thereafter, the two sides continued to simply trade with one another indirectly via the Silk Road or by the sea routes around India. For the remainder of the empire, Chinese silk remained a highly sought-after luxury item in Rome, and was a major point of contention both for old-school conservatives who found how revealing the fabric was disturbing, and proto-economists who worried about how much gold was disappearing east for nothing but a few scraps of cloth. Matthew, if I'm even pronouncing that correctly, riffing off my observation that the Romans tangled up Pyrrhus's war elephants the same way that the Rebel Alliance brought down the Imperial Walkers during the Battle of Hoth, asks, did the Republicans or Imperial armies learn any other tactics from the rebellion? Short answer, no, I don't think so. But I can absolutely promise you that a single Roman legion would have whipped the Ewoks without breaking a sweat. Four Forks, among others, wants to know about the show's process, how the podcast is put together, how long it takes to write and record each episode. Each show takes about 10 to 12 hours to knock out, not counting the time I spend just reading, which is time I don't bother to calculate since I'd be doing it anyway. My days off have become very jumbled lately, so my research writing hours are constantly shifting around. But for a long time, the routine was that I would spend an hour or two during the week working up a detailed outline of what I wanted to talk about and where I wanted to get to. Then I would get up on Saturday and write for maybe 6 or 7 hours and try to bank about 3,000 words. Then I'd get up on Sunday, edit what I had written the day before, and write the last 500 to 1,000 words to wrap things up. Then I'd let it all rest, go back and edit again, double check whatever facts I wasn't 100% on, and read through it aloud to catch any tongue-twister landmines that I had left for myself. Then, recording 20 minutes of material takes about another hour, depending on how in the zone I am. For this, I run 2 parallel vocal tracks in GarageBand, and when I stumble over something, I cut out the last few seconds, hop to the other track, and pick up where I left off. When I'm done, I convert it into an MP3, upload it to the hosting site, and release it into the world. Then, I have a beer, congratulate myself on a job well done, and begin fretting about next week's show. John Grandin wants to know, at the 100th episode, The History of Rome Games, who wins the following fights? 1. Secutor versus Retiarius, which are 2 kinds of gladiator styles. 2. Nero versus Commodus. 4. Kirk Douglas versus Russell Crowe. 5. England versus the United States in the World Cup. First, it seems like the Secutor would be usually favored, but a talented Retiarii was nothing to mess around with. Plus, he'll make you look like a fool when he beats you, so draw. 2. Commodus for sure. By all accounts, he was an excellent shot and a well-trained gladiator, even if he never really tested his skills in a fair fight. Nero wouldn't stand a chance. 3. Cleopatra. Messalina was a bumbling amateur compared to Cleopatra. 4. Sadly, I have to go with Russell Crowe. I mean, Kirk Douglas is like 94 years old. 5. The United States, because who says I can't be irrationally partisan about some things? George Smiley asks, here's a frivolous, non-historical question. Where does the theme music for The History of Rome come from? Is that Mike on guitar? The intro is one of those accidents of history. First of all, it's not me playing, though if I had to do it all over again, I would definitely write and record the music myself, as I am, quite proudly, an accomplished mediocrity on the guitar. Basically, when I was cutting the first episode, I knew I wanted to inject some music at the beginning of the show, so I dug around in the GarageBand loops until I found something I kinda liked and pasted it in there. Then I released the episode without ever considering what kind of commitment I was making to that one particular loop, which I still like just fine. It's just, yeah, it's a freaking GarageBand loop. Acoustic picking 18 for you Mac users out there. At least it's not 80s dance-based synth 6. Bob Tom asks, will Mrs. The History of Rome ever make an appearance?
Yes, and she just did.
Ryan Reyes, among others, particularly Ryan R313, was wondering about making the dead emperors gods. Were they seen as gods equal to Saturn and the others? How did that work? The old Greco-Roman pantheon had literally hundreds of major and minor deities who all vied for the attention of the lowly humans. The dead and deified emperors, beginning with Julius Caesar, were slated in as minor gods, nowhere near as powerful as, say, Jupiter or Mars, but still important enough that worshipping at their altars was considered a civic duty. Neglecting sacrifices or ceremonies in their honor would have invited disaster on Rome, as the imperial cult became wrapped up in the larger set of official state superstitions that kept the empire safe and thriving. In practice, though, worshipping dead emperors was less an act of devout piety or even crass superstition, as it was a demonstration of loyalty to the sitting emperor. It was all much more about visibly supplicating yourself before the imperial altar, which the emperors, as you can imagine, like to see, than really believing that if you didn't offer a goat to the ghost of Titus, that bad things would happen. Not that you really had a choice anyway. Refusing to make a sacrifice to the deified Caesars was considered treason and a capital crime. So yes, technically, the dead emperors were considered gods, especially in the Eastern Empire, where notions of divine monarchs has a long-standing history. I highly doubt, however, that a single senator voting for deification believed that Nerva was now actually a god. Keith Day asks, if you could sum up the Romans in 3 words, what would they be? I think the only reasonable answer is Vini, Vidi, Vici, right? Scott DeBrueker, among others, asks, I thought a pivotal event in history was the burning of the Library of Alexandria, an event thought to have set human progress back 1,000 years. I was astonished when it was not even referenced in a past episode. Yes, the absence of the Library of Alexandria from our narrative was an oversight on my part, especially since Julius Caesar himself is accused of having started the fire that allegedly set humanity back 1,000 years. For those of you who don't know, the Library of Alexandria was founded in the 200s BC by either Ptolemy I or Ptolemy II, and thereafter was liberally endowed to not only act as the repository for every written work that had ever been written anywhere, but also as an active research institution that employed around 100 scholars and scientists at any given time. Supposedly, the library contained a working steam engine, so its destruction came as a huge blow to human development. But the thing is that the jury is still out on when the library was actually destroyed and who destroyed it. Some, like Plutarch, say that it was Caesar who torched it by accident while fighting for control of the city in 49 BC. Others say it was destroyed by Aurelian in the 270s when he was reconquering the breakaway East. Gibbon said it was destroyed by the reactionary Christian patriarch Theophilus during his crusade to eradicate all things pagan in the late 300s, while finally, some say that the library existed all the way into the 600s when it was finally burned by Umar the Great as his Islamic forces swept into Egypt. Unquestionably, the library existed, and unquestionably, at some point, it stopped existing. But when that happened is still a bit of a mystery. I tend to believe that multiple institutions and collections were built, maintained, destroyed, and rebuilt over the years that all held the moniker Library of Alexandria, which contributes a great deal to the confusion. Clearly, though, Plutarch believes that the Great Library was gone by the time he was writing in 120, and as a Greek scholar, he would have been in a position to know. Absent a time machine, I don't think we'll ever know what really happened or what exactly was lost. What we do know is that had the library survived, we'd all be teleporting to our jobs in the parallel universe of our choice by now. Rich asks, do you plan to combine your transcripts and sell them as a book when all is said and done? The answer is a qualified yes. I've been very hesitant about trying to publish the material as it is because I wrote it specifically to be read aloud, by me. I was and am worried that it will translate about as well as your average stand-up comedy routine would. When something is specifically designed to be spoken and depends on particular timing and inflection for the jokes to come out right, well, reading it on paper just doesn't do it justice, you know? But then again, with a little expert tweaking, maybe we could figure out a way to make it work. I've been so busy writing new material, though, that I have the old stuff. So, if anyone out there works in publishing, by all means, get in touch with me and help me out. John asks, which Roman emperor, consul, triumvir do you think you personally emulate the most? Well, Claudius wrote a lot of history, so there's that. Dan Lim, among many, many others, asks, personally,